Y'all want to go ahead and have a seat? I'm going to introduce our keynote speaker for today. And before I do that, I was just going to share a quick story about us even having Rory here to begin with. So, as we began planning for this spring, and we'd already known what our topic was going to be, the productive home, last year Vance had allowed me to borrow the book Durable Trades. I didn't know anything about Rory. And then it was just like in the span of a week, Vance let me borrow Durable Trades, and then I'd heard Rory on a couple podcasts, and not even really trying to find you at that time. It's just you happened to be on that podcast at that time as I was reading that book. And Vance was like, well, who do you think, if you can have anybody, who would you want to have speak at this event? I said, well, if I could have anybody, I'd like to have Rory Groves, but I mean, he's all the way in one of those states up there that, they all get mixed in together. I'm not even really sure where he is. I know he's not close to here. And Vance was like, well, we thought that we wouldn't get speakers that we wanted before. So last fall, we reached out to Josh Niemi and Israel Wayne, thinking both of them would say no, and then they both said yes. So we're like, okay, we'll just find out if Rory is available. We already had our date set for being April 29th. We're like, here's the date. We know it's kind of a long shot, but, we'd just like for you to consider. And Rory basically responded, was like, yeah, that'll work out. That should work out just fine. I mean, we're going to be in Tennessee the day before that, so, yeah, we can just swing by. So that's how we are where we are. And we're just hoping that we could get Rory to come here, and it just all worked out according to how the Lord would have it. So Rory is an author. He's a homesteader. I'm sure he'll give you way more information than that. His family is here with him today, and we are ecstatic to have him here with us today and to be our keynote speaker. So I'll get out of the way, and I will go ahead and open up the floor for Rory Groves.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay, I'm going to get my notes set up here, and while I do that, I'm going to ask my wife, Becca, to come up, because she whispered something in my ear just before we finished worshiping. I said, that's really good, but I'm not going to say it. You are. So here's Becca Groves.
We were singing back there, and I said to him, you need to go and tell these families that family looks really good on them, and that it's really fun to see moms who are being mothers, and it's really good to see dads who are being fathers. And amen is right. I said, you got to say that out loud, because nobody says that in the world, right? I mean, that's it's so the work of being a mother and a father is so day in and day out, and we don't really get out that often, honestly. So I just wanted to say it looks great on this group. It's really a joy to be here. And even this hum of noise, that's like the hum of joy and the next generation, right? I mean, that's a sweet thing. Actually, can I share about the camera stuff? No, we were at a conference yesterday that I had my kids in there, and there were no other children, and it was like 700 people, and we were in the front row, and so you're dishing out raisins as fast as you can, but I said to Rory, it's really curious that a cameraman can come around and stand right in front of you and a big boom camera, and that's okay. But then, your children, ooh, keep the kids quiet. So, at any rate, it's a joyful noise in here. And now I'll let Rory talk.
Amen. Well, thank you very much, Vance, Chris, for having us here today. Let me adjust this just a bit so I'm not fighting location. And I'm just going to have to trust you. If you all in the back can hear me okay, you just let me know, and if you can't, yeah, okay, you got thumbs up there. So as Chris already mentioned, my name is Rory Groves. We live in southern Minnesota and moved to a hobby farm about 10 years ago, 10-acre hobby farm about 10 years ago. And I've been asked to speak on the conference's theme, which is a productive home, or the productive home, which is a topic that I get into in my book. I think I'll give you a brief synopsis of the book, but basically what happened is, maybe about 15 years ago, I have been a computer programmer, technologist my entire career. I mean, 25, 30 years plus. I was a little kid. All I ever wanted to do is work in the computer industry, and that's basically all that I had done. And it dawned on me one day, about 15 years ago, that if the power were to ever go out, like in a meaningful way, in a prolonged way, I really had nothing that I could contribute to society. I was very high up in specialized skill sets. I didn't know how to build things. I didn't know how to grow things. I didn't know how to fix things. And it just kind of started to sit with me that these are probably some things that I should know how to do. I mean, after all, didn't every generation since Adam know how to do these things up until the last 2 or 3? Am I a little hot here on the mic? You want me to stand further back or goes forward? You'll adjust it, okay. And so anyway, those thoughts started to percolate a little bit with me, and a few years after that, we started looking for land. We lived in a tiny little a city lot in South Minneapolis. This was fortunately before things were burning to the ground all over Minneapolis, but we were living, and we didn't have much yard space. We didn't really have a way to cultivate or learn to do some of these skills. We couldn't keep animals or things like that. So we started looking for land out in the country, and we moved out there, and everything that we've been doing out there has been learning from scratch. And so what I often will tell people is that if we can do these things, in other words, our expertise is being non-experts, being novices. And if we can figure out how to do some of these things like grow foods and homestead, we really feel that everyone can do these things. As I was learning how to homestead and kind of add some of these skills, now I was still at the time I moved out there, I was still involved in the computing profession, very much so. I started working on a project which became a book, Durable Trades, but really all that I was trying to do with this project was figure out a way, seeing on the horizon how our highly specialized economy, modern economy, where it's headed, and I'm speaking as a technologist who's been watching this for decades, I could just see the writing on the wall. I mean, that's why we got out of the city early in the 2010s. That's why I started to learn how to grow food. That's why I started to look for more home-based, durable economies that we could do with my family. And the question that burned in my mind, though, is how do you actually make a living doing it? You know, it's one thing to talk about having a home-based farm economy, but it's another thing when you try to replace your salary as a computer programmer by selling chicken eggs, right? It's like how this is actually going to work. So I started to ask the question is, first of all, what would be a stable profession in the times that are going to be coming? And we know, I think we all know, and especially since 2020 came through, we've all seen kind of behind the curtain. Society is a lot more fragile than we all thought. Not all of us, but than a lot of people thought. And so what would be professions that would withstand shocks to the system, which would withstand recessions? Of course, you know, the 2008 recession really did a number on a lot of businesses. And I had lived through 2001, 9/11. That was a pretty big shock to the system. And now we've just gone through the nonsense of the pandemic shutdowns and some of this other stuff. And so what are the kinds of careers, and this is before any of that happened, but what are some of the careers that we could engage in that would be stable? My profession of computers and technologies, do we have any technology consultants in the room or IT programmers? Good for you guys. Oh, sorry. This guy over here. You got some IT background? Okay, we got some durable, skilled work in this room is kind of what I envision. By the way, I was immeasurably impressed with the Hops household that we had the privilege to stay in last night, and he showed me around his farm and all the building structures that he's done, and it's just really neat to see other folks homesteading and taking this seriously. But anyways, going back to it, I wanted to look for something that was not only durable, that was likely not to be automated away, which a lot of technology jobs are going to be, something that was going to be around for a while, didn't require continuous retraining, but also, was there anything out there that I could bring my family into the work? You know, I kind of describe it this way. We moved to a hobby farm, and think about a hobby. We just wanted to kind of play in the dirt, plant a big garden, raise some animals. Everything we did on the farm, we were doing together as a family, and we were learning together. We were doing these things together. But then I would leave my family to go to my quote unquote real job, which was sitting alone in a room staring at a computer screen. And it was just kind of odd to me because, the Bible says that God created Adam and Eve to tend the garden. He put them to tend and keep it. And our first actual job in society or on planet Earth was to tend the garden. And then Cain and Abel came, and they're keepers of flocks and tillers of the ground. And so for some reason, we're in this age where everything electronic and artificial is considered the real work. And the stuff like working with your family and digging in the earth and being connected with creation, somehow that's the hobby farm, right? I call it a hobby farm. And so anyway, all those questions percolating after a number of years just led me to try to discover what's out there for guys like me. I was, I think, 40 at the time I started working on this. What's out there for guys like me or other generations of guys who want to do something with their families? Like you can think of well, there's farming, but what else is there? And what survived the upheavals of past centuries and what's likely to continue? So that was where I started to try to answer that question, and it ended up becoming a bigger project than I thought. And I came up with a list of 61 trades that have been around since before the Industrial Revolution, meaning basically at the founding of our nation, and they're still around today. So the thesis is that if it has survived for the last 230 years, it's gone through things like wars, revolutions, civil wars, recession, depression, hyperinflation of the currency. All of these things, these professions have survived, and that makes them incredibly durable. I put that into a book, and I put it out there to see if anyone else was interested, and a few folks were interested in it. And it's led to further discussion and opportunities to share and meet folks like this in different states. We've been very grateful. We just came up from Nashville yesterday. We were at Rory Groves' farm last Wednesday and got to do a discussion on AI, and just met a lot of really good folks, and we're very grateful to be here with you today. Also, part of our family economy right now is publishing, and so we produce a newsletter. It's a quarterly newsletter. It's a family newsletter, Faith, Farming, and Family, and we're trying to share and encourage other families who are trying to go a different direction. A lot of people that come to we host events on our farm as well, teach homesteading and just teach about the family economy. A lot of families that come feel like they're kind of the unusual ones, either in their church or in their family, for thinking this way, for maybe having a little bit of a concern about the future. And so one of the things we try to do is just document what we're learning, and it's all free. And if you want to grab one that's at our table, back there by where the books are, you'll see my son Ivor sitting there in between the sessions today. Go grab one, sign up, it's totally free, and if you feel like this is something that you'd like to get more of, we'll come, there's a mailing list sign up that you can get on the back. So let's jump into my topic today, which is on the productive home, and specifically I've titled my talk, The Visionary Home. The scripture says that without vision, a people perish, and it's interesting when you do the word study on the word perish. I always kind of thought that, what does that really mean, perish? Because the people don't just go away. I mean, they're still there. Visionless people, I mean, I guess they could get conquered, but even then, they're still there. They don't just all keel over dead if they lose their vision. So if you look into the word perish, P-R-I-S-H, what you actually find out is that essentially, you could define it as they cease to be a people. They lose their identity. They cease to be one. And so if you take that concept, and you can see where that's happened, right? God scattered the Israelites over all the nations. They perished because they lost their vision. They lost their first love. Well, the same thing can happen to families. Families in our modern age have lost their vision. And we're seeing right now the breakdown, really the final stages of the breakdown of family, because we have lost the purpose of what a family is meant to do and what a family is for. It is not just for emotional support or relational comforts. There is a very durable basis and a foundation for the families that we have lost. And if a family loses its vision, they cease to be a people. You will see within a very short time, maybe even the children or the grandchildren, it will cease to be a family with a shared identity. And that's something that I think is a major concern in our culture today, and I think it's something that can be reversed by gaining a vision. William Gouge, writing back in 1622, says, "The family is a little church and a little commonwealth." Today we have a myopic view of the family, meaning very short-sighted. It's been reduced from an impenetrable fortress and pillar of civilization to an optional appendage in modern society. Today we see things like the single-person household in economic reports and censuses. Such a label would have been inconceivable to pre-industrial society because you needed a family in order to survive. There's no such thing as a single-person household. A household was composed of all the members of that house, that family, that worked together just to survive. In fact, in Puritan New England, so going back to the 1700s, a single person was not even allowed to have a household or to own land in most of the communities. If you came into the community, you wanted to be part of one of those villages or those towns, and you were single, and you didn't have a family of your own, you were joined to another family in order to take part in that community. That's how important family relationships were in former times. Land and householding were inseparable from relationships. The relationships are what upheld and maintained the land. The Greeks have a concept called the good life. You'll read Aristotle or some of the early Plato, you'll read a lot, you'll see this term about the good life. They're very concerned with preserving the good life as a goal of theirs. And it's predicated on the concept of the self-sufficient household. The household was supposed to do three things. One, it was supposed to, well, two things really, but it was supposed to provide a basis that provided for all of your material needs within the household. So all of the family business took place that provided your needs. And then on top of that, it enabled you to go out and seek what was considered the good life, which included, for the Greeks, it included things like philosophy and civic engagement, politics. For us, we would say things like generational faith or taking dominion. But the point is that work was never viewed as an end in itself. Work was never a means to a paycheck. It was a springboard, a platform, or a home base from which new territory could be conquered and strategic assets, like our children, could be defended. So this concept of a home base is completely lost in modern times, I would suggest. There's a sociologist from Russia who would write about the breakdown of the family from his homeland, which was Soviet Russia, but he commented on problems that he saw in the Western nations as well. And I'm going to read a passage from what he wrote called "The Crisis of Our Times." He says, "In the past, the family was the foremost educational agency for the young. Some 100 years ago, it was well nigh the sole educator for a vast proportion of the younger generation. At the present time, its educational functions have shrunk enormously. The family is less and less a religious agency, whereas in ancient times, the head of the family was a priest, which is known as the paterfamilias. Its place is taken either by nothing or Sunday schools and similar institutions. Formerly, the family supplied almost the only means of subsistence for its members. At the present time, this function, too, is enormously reduced. Hundreds of other agencies, including state and philanthropic institutions, perform it. So it is with recreational functions. Formerly, the family circle took care of these. Now we go to the movies, the theaters, the nightclubs, and the like, instead of, quote, wasting our time at home. Now families are small and their members are soon scattered. Even when they do live together, for the greater part of the day, they work and live in separate places. And in the evening, they again disperse in quest of recreation. The result is that the family home turns into a mere overnight parking place. So I wanted to spend a little bit of time today looking at this, what the home used to be, and reimagining what a home could be, a visionary home. A people who are not only bound together by a unified vision, but they're far-sighted. They're looking down the road. They're preparing a future reality for their own children, sometimes children yet unborn. and sometimes their children's children. So they will have a visionary, so their children's children will have a visionary and prosperous home. So William Bradford, Pilgrims are my heroes, really, what they suffered and what they risked in order to found, because they saw a better country far off. But I think of them often. William Bradford wrote that they would be as stepping stones to future generations. And I think that is an interesting posture to assume as parents. Will you lay down so that your children can walk across you? Or are you going to just continue on to serve your own needs for your own time and let your children figure it out on their own? So my goal is to broaden our horizons a little bit, to break out of the boxes that modern society has put around the family, to reclaim our heritage as God intended. And I do believe that the truly meaningful way, the only meaningful way to continue Christian civilization is through strong, functional homes, engaging in everything God designed the family to do. So let me stop at the outset here and say, why does it matter? What do we need to go back and look at pre-industrial time? Why am I talking about the Pilgrims? Who cares about the Pilgrims, right? We have internet-enabled doorbells now. Who needs the Pilgrims? So I'm not going to go into it in this talk here. It's a subject of other talks that I give. But to sum it up, the Industrial Revolution really changed the way that we think about family and the household. And so if we are going to understand what we need to do moving forward, I believe we need to step back a few centuries and look at what family and the homes were doing back then. And even better is to step back to Genesis and start at the beginning. What did God say in Genesis? He instituted the family to take dominion, didn't he, over the earth? He didn't give it to corporations. Corporations are not the ones that are supposed to be having dominion. Neither are governments. Neither are rogue experts or individualists. He gave it to a community that is known as the family. And he imbued blessed power and divine authority to the family order in order to accomplish this task. The world has done its best to try to eradicate that image because the world hates the image of God. It doesn't want to see the family taking dominion. It doesn't want to see fathers raising their children in the fear and nurture of the Lord. They'd rather have the state enforcing discipline or reforming character rather than the family. In his book about the Pilgrims, historian John Demos talks about all the various functions of the pre-industrial family, but he uses the labels that we've turned into modern day institutions. For example, I'm going to quote from him, and I think it's helpful to try to think about this in the way that he's laid it out. He said the old colony family was first of all a business, an absolute central agency of economic production and exchange. Each household was more or less self-sufficient, and its various members were inextricably united in the work of providing for their fundamental material wants. Work, indeed, was a wholly natural extension of family life and merged imperceptibly with all of its other activities. In other words, work was not something that was separate from family life, and it was not separate from the home. All of it was integrated into the whole, and everyone was involved. The family was also a school. Parents were charged by law to attend to the education of all the children in their immediate care, quote, at least to be able to read the scriptures. The family was a vocational institute. It served to prepare its young for effective, independent performance in the larger economic system. The family was a church. The obligation of family worship seems to have been widely assumed. Daily prayers and personal meditation formed an indispensable adjunct to the more formal devotions of a whole community. The family was a house of correction. Idle and even criminal persons were sentenced by the court to live as servants and families of more reputable citizens. The household seems a natural setting for both imposing discipline and character reformation. And his list goes on. He says the family was a welfare institution, a hospital, an orphanage, a nursing home, even a poorhouse. Demos, he then concludes that clearly most of the functions enumerated above have long since been transferred out of the family, transferred to other institutions specially contrived for the purpose. So I thought this would be our model for conversation today, that we could go through some of these aspects, or as Demos describes them, specially contrived institutions of the pre-industrial family, and perhaps we can get an expanded vision of what the family can be in our society today. I think we can reverse engineer what used to work in the past and bring it into our families today. Amen, indeed. I mentioned earlier, why bother? Why do we need a self-sufficient home? And I don't know how much persuading I need to do on this, but we're in I believe, the last stages of a dying civilization. The family is the fundamental unit of society. No matter what, it's not, like we've said, it's not a government, it's not the corporation, it's not institutions. The family is what all of society is built on. And we've done a pretty good job over the last, I would say, 200 or plus years, but especially in the last 50, 60 years, of completely wiping away, fracturing, cracking these foundations, turning them into foundations of sand. And so to those of us who see danger coming, we're looking and we're thinking, and those of us who have our hearts turned to the children, we're thinking about these things. What do we do to get our families out of the way of the collapsing high towers? What do we do to preserve our families through the coming dark ages? I think that we have to become more capable ourselves. We can't simply assume that we're going to be able to order things on Amazon, or we're going to be able to get it at the grocery store. And I don't think I have to be persuasive on that. We've seen these things happen already. The more dependent we are on external systems, on long supply chains, the more likely we're going to be impacted. When we all went through the shutdowns and the lockdowns, it was interesting, the people's responses and the feedback that we would get from different families as to how hard it was to experience some of those lockdowns. And the thing that we noticed, at least for our family, at that point we had spent, roughly 7, 8, or 9 years learning to become more self-sufficient. Actually, we were pretty well off during that time period. We had more time to do things with our own family on our own farm. We were still working. We still had jobs. We were growing our food. I'm not saying that there was no impact, but it wasn't a hugely negative experience for us to see, China go offline for a few weeks, or to see the movie theater shut down, or to have the kids come home instead of being in the public schools. We were already homeschooling. There was all these different ways that we were positioned, and families that we knew were positioned to kind of take the brunt of that disruption pretty well, to weather it well. On the flip side, we also knew of other families, Christian families, that were extremely distraught over everything that they had lost, over the loss of access to food, over toilet paper, over the movie theaters and the entertainment, and having to put up with their unruly kids all day because now they had to be at home on public school via Zoom meetings. There were all these situations that kind of manifested through that experience. And I just thought, that's kind of interesting. And I really do think that what we went through in 2020 and what we're still kind of going through right now is a tremor of the quake to come. I don't think it's over. So in other words, I think that we need to rebuild what's called the family economy. Alan Carlson writes that successful households are the natural reservoir of liberty. They aim at autonomy or independence, enabling their members to resist oppression, survive economic, social, and political turbulence, and renew the world after troubles have passed. By the way, we talk for all that we talk about evangelism and being salt and light in a lost and perishing world. I guarantee you that if you get to a point where people can't find food, but for some reason you have food, you will appear very bright and salty to those people, and they will come to you looking for answers. How did you know this? What led you to this position? What can you teach me about your God who would drive you in this direction, and why? There will be a whole lot of evangelism happening automatically if you're just diligent to do the things that God has put on your heart already. Amen. So first thing he mentions is that a household or a family is a business, the foremost agency of economic production. And this is, I think, where the biggest gap exists in our day. There's been a lot of great strides in homeschooling, and I'll mention that too. But what Becca and I have dedicated the rest of our lives to is to helping to rebuild the family economy. And this means simply families working together, finding ways, some ways for families to come together. We've seen, why? Because there's so much in the modern economic system that rips families apart, that pulls dads out of the home, that pulls moms out of the homes. I mean, so many families today can't afford to live without a two-parent working household. Now, I believe that God can make provision for every family who's willing to sacrifice, but there are many people, at least they feel that they're in that position. And so mom and dad are pulled out of the household. Maybe the kids are in daycare. Maybe the siblings are separated in public schools, right? Even in public schools, we have age segregated. Why do they have to segregate by age? Even the siblings are spread apart. In our churches, we do this. I mentioned this yesterday or a couple days ago. You know, even in our churches, the parents and the children, and many, many churches are worshiping separately on Sunday mornings. And you have youth pastors replacing fathers as the chief inculcators of spiritual formation for our children. So when you divide the family, and all of that goes back to this factory model, the idea that the most important thing is to produce an abundance of material goods rather than build relationships. So they took functions that used to exist in the family and they brought it into the factory. And then families separated to get those jobs in the factories. Now, for 5,000 years, up until that point, that isn't the way that society worked. We all worked together on the home farm. I mean, I think 80%, roughly, about the start of the Industrial Revolution, about 90% of society worked on farms. And those who didn't still farmed to some degree. But the point is that the families, whatever they did, whether they're in the blacksmith shop, whether they were writing or publishing, or whether they were orchardists or statesmen, they all were with their families. That was the central economic unit of society. So when I talk about the family economy, I don't suggest that everybody quit their jobs and open up lemonade stands. I think that the idea is to just reframe your paradigm. What's the idea? What does your family exist for? What did God put you together to do? This is where it's going to be a different answer for each individual family than it is for mine. There's not a formula to that. When I wrote Durable Trades, that was my first step of saying, hey, what are my options? If I don't want to end up out of a job in a couple of years due to artificial intelligence, which when I wrote this, it was 5 years ago, so a lot of that's coming to pass now. What do I need to do today? What are some options for my family? But it takes time. It might actually take a generation. You know, if you think about it, this kind of mindset, this factory mindset, was not able to break apart the family overnight. It took generations to break down those foundations. It was so pervasive, the concept of working together. That's why the family existed. And so it may not happen overnight for you and your family. But what can you start to do today to work together, even if it's at the edges? Like, for example, can you cut out some of the hobbies? Can you cut out the golf and the movies and the TV and build a chicken coop together? Can you plant a garden together? Can you preserve food or cook meals? Are there functions that you can do together as a family instead of buying things at the store or hiring an expert to do it? Those are the beginnings of refunctionalizing your home. And then I would say, take a step of faith. See if the Lord blesses your efforts in this way. I personally believe, and I have seen this happen over and over again, that the Lord blesses those steps when families seek ways to work together rather than delegating out. And he increases. There's an abundance. There's a multiplication of what happens. And in some cases, people are able to quit that day job. And I don't know if they're doing lemonade stands. They'd be pretty extensive lemonade stands if that was the case, but they are able to build a home economy and they're able to gain their freedom and independence with their families. We receive letters, because we've been doing this for a number of years now, we receive letters from families who walk through this exact course all the time. Here's one I wanted to share. This guy's name is Bo Hutches, and he's down in Colorado. He says, hey, Rory and Becca, I wanted to reach out to you to tell you about my example of a durable trade. My family and I live in southern Colorado, and I recently took a job and relocated down to northern New Mexico. It's a seasonal job, 6 months on and off, pressure washing and staining mountain homes. Red River is a vacation destination for many Texans and Oklahomans, so there is decent money up here. So I guess that means that our trade is that of painter in your book. We make great money in this trade. The owner makes $80,000 in 6 months, and he brought me in for $30,000 the first year, plus $10,000 increase in pay for the next 2 seasons until I buy him out of the business. Along with this trade, we kept our home in Alamosa, Colorado, and decided to Airbnb the bottom floor. So far, we have been able to cover the house payment for May and June, and I expect this trend to continue as the summer goes on. My wife manages the Airbnb side of things, and I stain the houses. Red River is a small enough town that I am home for lunch every day, and my wife and 2 kids can come and visit me on the job site. All in all, I'm a painter and a modern-day innkeeper. Because of this decision and taking this job, we achieve financial freedom and start building generational wealth far faster than we could have otherwise. And so he's essentially saying he took a leap of faith to pursue this vision with his family, and it's paid off in a major way. And I would just classify a couple things as I read through this. There's this increased time together. It's 6 months on and 6 months off. So he found a way to be able to pay the bills and have half a year off. Well, now he could devote that to other types of work if he wants to, or he could spend time with his family building out his family economy. He had creative overlapping of family businesses. So this is another principle of family economies. I go into it in the book, but most families throughout history did not practice one specialized vocation like we do today. You know, someone was a painter. There were also many other things at the same time. I use the example of Benjamin Franklin. He was at the age of 15 a publisher. He started a publishing business with his brother at the age of 15. So then he's also a statesman, an inventor, a scientist, an author. I mean, these families were involved in so many things. Read Farmer Boy from Laura Ingalls Wilder and consider all of the different ways that they were involved. Now, you would maybe just say, well, they're farming. Yeah, but they're raising horses, they're tapping maple trees, they're storing up ice for refrigeration in the summertime, they're logging. All of these are distinct specialized professions today. If you really look at it through that lens, you'll see that there's many opportunities to produce multiple streams of income, support your family, and do a huge variety of work. Also, I would mention that Bo is in a very stable profession because artificial intelligence, which is in the news right now, is not going to displace people who stain mountain homes, not anytime soon. It will displace upwards of 800 million white-collar workers worldwide by 2030. So if you live in America and you have a white-collar job that has to do with anything that's clerical or information processing, there's a 1 in 3 chance that job won't exist by 2030. School. A family was also a school, Demos talks about, and a vocational institute, preparing its young for effective, independent performance in the larger economic system. Public school students, I'll mention this, spend a minimum of 10,800 hours in a classroom. So public school students, minimum, it actually can often be many thousands more than that depending on your state, 10,800 hours in a classroom. That's Israel Wayne. So another way to look at that is this: families who choose to homeschool their kids are adding at least 11,000 hours of time discipling, mentoring, and building relationships with their children at the most critical phase of that child's life, a phase that is going to dictate where that child is going to be for the rest of his life. In other words, you're not waiting until you hit that retirement package and your son is 18, 19, 25 years old, and then you're going to spend some time building that relationship. It means that you're spending that time while the child is 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years old. That will determine the child's future trajectory a whole lot more than when they're older. And you're doing homeschooling during those years. Demos writes that for most children of this period and place, again, he's talking about pre-industrial families, the major kinds of learning occurred at home. Here, in the context of the total household environment, values, manners, literacy, vocation were all transmitted from one generation to the next. I would say that the entire purpose of education that they passed laws for in New England during the 17th century was solely at least primarily for this one purpose, which was they wanted their children to be able to read the Bible. You had higher literacy rates in New England than anywhere else in the world for many, many years. In fact, well, the laws for compulsory education, which started in the 1850s, 1852 is the first compulsory education law, which meant state-run schools. The literacy rate actually went down 20 years later after enacting compulsory education. And it's never gotten back to as high as it was when homeschooling was the predominant method of education in certain locations. So I would say homeschooling is vital. It's essential. It's right there. You can do this. Families, many families from all walks of life have refunctionalized their home through homeschooling. It's never been easier. I mean, there were parents back in the 80s and 90s that were doing this, 70s, illegally. Some of them went to prison. They at least got sued. Every single state, it was illegal up until I think the early 1980s was when it first started to become, started to crack the dam, so to speak. It's legal in all 50 states now. Families who have a lot of money, families who have virtually no money, all of this wide spectrum of people are able to pull off homeschooling with mom staying at home, or with mom and dad doing some kind of mix so that they can keep their kids at home and be a school again for their children. Also mentioned Vocational Institute. I think we overlook or underestimate what our children are capable of today in the modern construct of society. Part of the reason we have such a deficit of skill sets in our younger generation, I mean, how many employers have decried the situation? They can't find young people who can work. They just simply can't seem to get the quality of labor that they used to. Well, but you take someone and you bolt them to a seat for 18 to 22 years. You give them extremely narrow, specialized vocational training, and then you have them come out at the age of 22 or 20, and you expect them to enter the workforce with a work ethic, right? And they've never actually worked a day in their lives. But they're highly specialized. They're doing one narrow profession, and it took them, 17 years of schooling to get there. But that's what this society encourages. And so as a vocational institute, we have to understand that the home was always the platform for apprenticeship. This is, they learned their 3 R's, and then they went out into the field, and they put it to practice, and they were plowing, and they were baling hay, and they were building sheds and mending fences. Demos writes this: it's striking that the 17th century, and indeed all centuries before our own, had no real word for the period of life between puberty and full manhood. What do we call that today? The period of life between puberty and full manhood. Anyone? What? Teenagers. That word didn't exist. Childhood, as we know it, did not last much beyond the age of 6 or 7 years. Children spent most of their time working and relaxing alongside older people, and were generally perceived as little adults. Teens, what we consider teens, formed a period of relative calm and steady progress toward full maturity. I have a 12-year-old son. Can you say hello, Ivor? He's sitting on the back seat. And a 10-year-old daughter. Where's Elsie? There you go. She's working. As many of you understand that have these kids that are, would be considered not skilled or not able to contribute meaningfully yet, you know that if the work is meaningful and purposeful, these kids, they want to work, especially if it's with their families, especially if they're joining in with what mom and dad and their older siblings are doing. And that's exactly what happens in our family. Our kid, look, we're lazy people by default, but we work against that, right? We mortify the flesh. That part aside, if you work towards it, it's amazing what your kids are capable of doing and what work ethic can be built up from a very young age. And the other thing I want to add is there's a window of time here. You have those first 7 years. I think it was Socrates who said, "Give me the child until he is 7, and I will give you the man." And the point being is that you pretty much have done the majority of your training by the time your child is 7. He's pretty much, the cast is die. I mean, the die is cast. if you haven't begun that training at a very early age appropriate training, then by the time they're 10, 11, 12, it's going to be very difficult for them to start. And so the folks that have the hardest time moving into a homesteading lifestyle with their children are the ones who move when their kids are 15, 16 years old. And, they don't want anything to do with it. It's a lot of work. But there's a way that you can introduce, that's one of the reasons we love living on a farm, is that you can introduce very necessary but simple tasks to younger children. I mean, our 3-year-old, 4-year-old, they'll be gathering eggs and, well, let's see, maybe 5. Depends how many they drop on the way back to the house. But the point is, there's something important. You gotta feed, you gotta water, you gotta do these things. It's all meaningful and it all contributes. And children, this is the other thing too. I don't know if any of you have ever heard of the gardener Paul Gauci. He pioneered a method of gardening called Back to Eden gardening. And I remember talking to him. I interviewed him for the book on the trade of gardening. And I remember talking to him about it. And he said, children know when they're needed. And so if you give someone work that's meaningful, such as in the family economy, such as what you do. So Ivor back there, he's manning the booth. And everyone in my family, they know that what they do is necessary and important. And I'm not giving them busy work. It's not worksheets to just keep them occupied while mom and dad do the real stuff. They know they're needed. That does something to a child's confidence, to their self-esteem, to their own ability to kind of feel like they're part of something bigger. And so that's why family economy is so important, especially one that lends itself to involving younger children. Okay. Third, the family is a church. And I think this is really where it all begins. I was glad to hear where the conference has been, focusing on family worship in the past and having Israel Wayne come and speak and the other gentleman that you've had. Because really, family, as I said before, is a manifestation of the image of God. And it says in Genesis right there, male and female, he created them. So in order to recapture a biblical vision for our families, we have to start by communing with God. This is another aspect that I had never heard of, honestly, growing up in the church, for maybe 35 years before I had ever heard of the concept of family worship. Gratefully, I connected with some ministers who have been preaching this for a very long time. But this was a normal function of the pre-industrial family. They viewed themselves as I said when I started out, a little church. Our churches are really composed of mini churches, little churches. And if you don't have strong family devotions and strong family worship happening on a daily basis, then it's going to break down in the larger church as well. It has to start at home. In fact, in the Puritan New England, pastors would check in with the families of their congregations at least twice a year to make sure that family worship was going on daily, actually twice daily in many cases. They would do a simple morning devotional time and usually a little bit of a longer extended time in the evening. If fathers neglected their responsibilities in family worship, they could be excommunicated. The fathers could be excommunicated from the church, and in extreme cases, the children would even be removed and put into the families of extended family members who would raise the children in the fear and nurture of the Lord. That's just, I don't want to comment on whether that's the right approach or not, but I want to comment on that's how seriously they took family worship in the context of a home. It was not a practice that was once a week on a Sunday and, delegated to staff of a church. I think most pastors would agree with me. They would much rather have all of the congregation, all of the families in their congregation doing family worship at home than being the sole provider of spiritual formation for every family in their congregation. Yeah? Amen. It's not, so this is another one that it's a function that every family can do. It's not complicated. Here's how it goes in our family. We sing a song, we read scripture, and we pray. That's it. That's family worship. But we do it every day. We rolled in at 10 o'clock last night. We were very tired. We got together and we prayed. We don't miss it. I just make it, personally, my kids will remember what was a priority by what I model. Essentially, what I will let slide. What I will give in on. They'll know As far as their dad is concerned, what really mattered by what I will stick to, what I'm loyal to. And one of the things that's important to me is that our kids know is that we do family worship every day. It's not even how profound it is. It's rarely how profound it is. It's that you're faithful in doing it and that dads lead it, the priests of the home. House of correction. I can't actually say that I have experience with taking in criminals in our household to enforce discipline or reform character, but we have certainly been had our share of correction in the Groves household. But I think this is interesting too, this concept of crime and punishment. Back in pre-industrial families, they didn't have police. Prior to 1830, there were no state-organized police departments in America. Those didn't exist. Communities policed themselves. They lived in small, decentralized communities. Many of the residents were related or extended family. Crime was significantly less, and when it did occur, it happened within the context of kin relationships. So, and I think this is key, there was love for the victim, obviously, but also for the perpetrator. And families can understand this paradox. A state cannot. A bureaucratic state can only enforce cold law. So the best place for correction to take place is within the family, and that's how the early American colonies handled it. What changed in 1830 to give rise to the police state? It was the depopulation of small communities. People moved into cities. They were now surrounded by strangers. So the kin relationships were gone. There was no more love governing correction, and crime soared, and it continues to soar to this day. And the only way to combat crime in this day, as you know, is with the fist of the law. It's coercion. It's not love that governs enforcement of crime now. It is because the people are unruly and they have to come down with an iron fist. So the other things mentioned, which I won't go into in detail here for the sake of time, welfare institution, hospital, orphanage, nursing home. You know, you get the picture that in the former times, there was a place for everyone in the home, the very young, the very old, the disabled, the infirm could all find meaning around the hearth of the function-rich home. Going back to Alan Carlson again, he writes about the dependency problem that modern societies now face. He says this: who will care for the very young, the very old, the weak, and the infirm? How shall rewards, in other words, salaries, given to productive adults be shared with those who are not or cannot be productive? In the natural human order, these tasks fall on kin networks, where spouses care for each other in sickness and in health, where parents nurture, train, and protect their offspring until they are able to create marriages of their own, where the aged enjoy care, purpose, and respect around the hearth of their grown children, and where kin ensure that no family member falls through the family's safety net. So in our society, we have what would be called delegated care. The answer to the dependency problem is delegated care. But what I would say is absent from Christian teaching and historic practice is any justification for neglecting others who are too old, too weak, too sick, too unplanned to be productive members of society. To the contrary, Scripture teaches that relationships, the care of others, is always the priority, not problems to be removed on the pathway to prosperity. Caregiving is not adventurous. Becca spoke to this earlier, and I want to affirm everything she said. It is not glamorous. It is mind-numbingly mundane, and it is usually unseen. At times, it may well put us into financial hardship. But caregiving is important. The mind-numbing, ordinary, unseen, everyday sacrifices have an impact far beyond what we see in the present. The simple act of giving your child your full attention is perhaps the greatest gift that can be given. It is the one thing that every parent has and every child needs. Harold B. Lee writes, "The most important of the Lord's work you and I will ever do will be within the walls of our own home." To that I'd add, we need to start preparing our children to take us in. Where do we get this idea that the purpose of life was to stack up a massive retirement fund, then deplete it while sitting alone in a nursing home being cared for by strangers. How is that the prosperous end to a life well lived? But how many people are pursuing that exact course? As for me, I want to be sitting by the hearth of my grown children in my last days. I want to be in the company of those I love most, my children and grandchildren, those for whom I have sacrificed the most. And I think that is the key right there. As soon as you place your future faith and trust in a paycheck or a bank account and not your children, it will affect every one of your relationships. Your kids will know who you loved more, and that will be factored into your end-of-life care. Let's be honest. Is the stock market really where you want to place your future hope and trust? This approach to welfare only works if we truly pour everything we have into our children while they are children. What if it doesn't work? What if Becca and I come to our final days and we go through all this sacrifice, financial hardship, and all this trouble to make our family the priority, and our family doesn't return the favor in our time of need? What then? I don't know. But it's a risk I'm willing to take. They will not have been wasted years, and the Lord sees it. Lastly, to this list of household functions that Demos goes over, I would add another. I would add fortress. The family is the first line of defense, a refuge, a castle wall against the influences of a hostile culture. It says you may not enter. In other words, it's as much about what you keep out as what you do within the walls of that fortress. So go ahead, shelter your kids. Feed and clothe them too. It's your job. The Bible has a standard for what we bring into our homes. It goes like this: in all thy ways acknowledge him, and he will direct thy paths. To me, the wording all thy ways in that verse means what it says, all thy ways. Does our entertainment acknowledge God in all its ways? Does our music acknowledge God in all its ways? Do our companions acknowledge God in all their ways? Do our fashions acknowledge God in all its ways? I suppose you could throw up objections and find situations where that standard doesn't fit perfectly. You might say something like, if my entertainment has to acknowledge God in all its ways, then there's nothing I can watch on TV. Exactly. Take your TV down to the gun range and do some target practice with your kids. I promise you it will be a lot more entertaining than anything on primetime. But truthfully, if we're looking for ways around this command, we are, in effect, asking God not to direct our paths. So where do you get started when we have families that hear this and they feel drawn in this direction to rebuild their own family economies? Often they come to us asking, how do we get started? It seems like an insurmountable task. And what we tell them is this: you start on your knees. If God has put a plan, if God has put a vision, a dream, an impossible dream on your heart, then he has a plan for getting you there. If he's given you a promised land, then it's up to him to part the seas. You just need to discern what the vision is and then take the first step. One thing that has helped our family is to do something, what we call a family gifts inventory. Or my wife likes to say, do the math. Sit down with your family, your husband, your spouse, your wife, your children, get out a notebook and start asking these questions. What has God gifted every person in our family to do? What are the educations, the talents, the interests, the background and experiences, the dreams? Write all these things out for each member of the family, then start to have a conversation. What could we do if we did something together? What's the math? What's the outcome of all of that God has given us, the raw resources that he's put together? Here's the thing. You are not some random collection of individuals cohabiting in the same overnight parking place, which what Patiram Sorokin talks about. You were joined together by God, right? And God has a purpose for your family that no other family on earth can accomplish. That's unique to you, and it's between you and the Lord to figure out what that is. So look for ways to begin bringing your family together around activities that will join you and build relationships. And if you want some practical ways to get started, I would say look for some of these family functions. What are some simple things that you can do together? Sacrifice some of the individual hobbies and entertainment budgets, and think of ways that you can, like I said before, cook a meal together, grow a garden, build something. I received an email from a gentleman who came to one of our events. When we host the events on our farm, the whole idea is just this, to inspire families to work together and to meet others and to get a vision for their families. But one of the gentlemen came to our farm, and he said, before I came to that event, it was a father-son event, he said, I had never touched a power tool in my life. We did some stuff. And he said his wife had always been badgering him to build a chicken coop. And so, but he said no, he just thought that was a waste of time. We don't need chickens. We'll buy our eggs at the grocery store. But he came up to this event with his son. His God got a hold of his heart. He said, up to that point, I was in computers. All I like to do with my spare time is play video games. Now I have a vision for my family. And he sent me a picture of a chicken coop that he built with his son that summer. And it was so neat because once God gives you that, loosens that grip of this modern construct of what success looks like, and he gives you a vision of flourishing through your family, through your children, a generational inheritance, that seed will permeate everything else in your life. Build a new family economy. So some of these small little things that you start together might become a new family business, which is what I read earlier to you today. And look for ways that you can have multiple streams of income, multiple businesses to be involved in. One of the things I've noticed is our kids, all of a sudden when we started, our family economy is a combination of a few things. A lot of it revolves around writing and publishing and teaching. Then we farm for our own subsistence as much as we can. One of the things I noticed is that God is bringing online new family enterprises through our children that I hadn't thought about because they weren't old enough at the time when we were dreaming this stuff up. But all of a sudden I can see, oh my word, this kid's going to be a woodworker. This daughter is going to be a tailor. This child down the road might be a midwife. I mean, there's all these things that I'm starting to realize, and we're going to have a shared economy for a time, and then they're going to go off on their own and build their own families, and they're going to have the freedom to stay with their families if I've been diligent to help them get set up. So it's fascinating. And I have been to communities, by the way, where you have 3 generations of people who've been practicing this, like Anabaptist communities. And I mean, blows my mind what the original parents did with their little bit of vision and what their children did after them. And then to see the 3rd generation doing after that, huge family businesses involved in so many different areas. Strong mentorship relationships between grandfathers and grandchildren, grandmothers and granddaughters. I mean, so much rich life. It's not the family being pulled apart in every segment of society. It's the family reuniting. And I think if we were to stand up here, if we were to bring someone out of, this one of the Plymouth Colony, Mayflower families or something, and we were to see a 3rd generation family and stand them before us, we would be amazed at their capacity and capability and knowledge and wisdom and love. Those are the things that are hard to see because we were born centuries from when this was a reality. But if you can get those eyes for a generational inheritance, don't just look at what you need this weekend or this year or for your retirement, but start thinking about your children's children. Look that far off. Look 50, 60 years down the road and ask yourself, what can we start doing today in the present moment to prepare for the future reality? And don't say that you can't make some of these significant changes. Think about our forefathers who were a bunch of farmers and artisans, and they defeated the most powerful military empire on the face of the earth, the British Empire. Why did they do that? To give us a republic. They were more concerned that their posterity would inherit the riches than that they would deplete them themselves. So you can do incredible things if your eyes are on the future, and I think this is key. Your hearts have to be turned to your children. If your hearts are not turned to your children, then the Lord gives you one other outcome for those whose hearts do not turn to their children in Malachi 4:6, lest I come and smite the earth with a curse. And I think what we're seeing in our day, and when I talk about the dark ages, I'm not messing around with that. I think we're under a curse. We're under judgment by God. And there are families and there are fathers and mothers who have turned their hearts away from their children. And he's saying, okay, you're going to get what comes with that. But he always preserves a remnant. And you can always tell who are you can never tell exactly, but you can always see clues. And one of those clues is that those whose hearts are turned to their children, they're the ones building the arks when it's never rained. They have this vision in their hearts, and they know that they need to be doing something, and they need to be doing it now, even though everyone else would say, you're crazy. You've got to be crazy. It's never rained here. What is rain? That'll never happen. But they have this persevering faith, and they're pushing through, and they're looking towards the future for the sake of their children. Amen.